Everyone. Charles Moscowitz, welcome to the program. Charles Moscowitz, thank you for joining me. And let's see, my guest is Dr. Michael Busler, PhD. He's a public policy analyst, economics expert, professor of finance at Stockton University in New Jersey. He's a featured columnist at Newsmax, LifeSet, and Town Hall. Michael, thanks for joining me today.
Charles, how are you? It's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Well, Michael, look, and I'm worried, like everyone else, about what's going to happen in the short and long term to the American and to the world economy, for that matter, as we're all basically holed up, in a medical state of martial law, literally. I mean, we can't go out. And I guess my question to you is, how long do you think this is going to have to go on before things really start to affect the economic overview?
Well, let's take a look at where we are. So January and February this year, the economy was very strong. Personal incomes were up. We were starting to grow. Wages were up. Inflation had remained relatively low. So we were in a real good spot. In fact, this year, the economy would have probably seen its best year in economic growth since 2005 had it not been for this coronavirus. Now, the virus hit. So far, about 10% of the workforce has been laid off. That's going to result probably in an unemployment rate. We don't get the next number until first week of May, but probably the unemployment rate will be in the 20% range.
Oh my God, that's incredible. That's more than the Great Depression. Well, the Great Depression, I think, was 30%.
At one time, yeah. And the other thing with the Great Depression was it ended up staying there for a long time period. I don't think that's going to happen here, subject to when the health issue can get resolved. But assuming we're at about the peak right now, and that they seem to be indicating that's the case, the number of new cases of coronavirus will start to decline now. And maybe in 2.5, 3 weeks, the end of April, I think the president will start to open up at least parts of the economy. There are areas that by then we'll have recorded no new cases probably for a couple of days. Those areas can be opened. Areas like New York, northern New Jersey, Detroit areas having some problems, New Orleans, some of the other cities will be a little slower to respond. Now, the federal government, in order to minimize the effect of the downturn and to keep it as short as possible, passed this massive stimulus package, which is both a good thing and a bad thing. So on the good side, with so many people unemployed, part of the package said that we're going to increase the amount of compensation you get each week by $600. And if you're unemployed for a longer period of time, we'll extend the length. So
now that's unemployment of $600 on top of what someone already is going to be getting on the state level.
On top of what the state benefit is. And now some conservatives complain that the total then is more than they would get if they were working. And that,
well, right. And there are a lot of small businessmen who are complaining about that, because you could actually make more per week collecting unemployment than staying in the company. And the irony to it is that the government is offering loans that could turn into grants to small businesses if they keep their employees on. So it's kind of a bit of a knot there.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So they increased the unemployment compensation benefit, so it is more than some people could get while they're working. That provides a disincentive to return to work. But for everybody else, this will carry them through a tough period. And you also mentioned that the Small Business Administration has a program. Will they lend companies money to pay for their labor costs and other expenses? They have to guarantee to keep everybody working. And if they do, as you mentioned, the loan turns into a grant, which means they don't have to repay it. All that on the good side means consumers will have income. In addition to that, the federal government, starting today, is sending $1,200 to every adult that filed a tax return last year, whether you're unemployed or not. So the people that are not that affected by this economically will see a big windfall. They're likely to go out and spend that. So if we can start to reopen businesses, And if the small businesses take those loans and keep their workers employed, and then consumers go out and start spending, I think we'll start to recover relatively quickly. I think by June, a recovery will start, and I think it will be very, very steep. So that by the end of the summer into the fall, I think you'll see the economy back to growing at a pretty good pace. Now, there's a lot of ifs that go into that, depending on what happens with the health issues. We also don't know from a behavioral standpoint, and I'm not a psychologist, what kind of an effect this social distancing will have with people going into the future. Is it going to be something that, for the next year or so, we're going to be nervous about getting close to people, or is it something that we'll get over this and return to normal? Just have to wait and see for that.
Well, I mean, your views are optimistic and a
Yes.
lot more optimistic than some of the views that I hear from, the mainstream pundits and whatnot who are saying we're going to be in lockdown for the rest of the year and this kind of stuff. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think the American people will tolerate that. We'll have a revolution if they try to do that.
Yeah. Look, people already going batty. So,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's crazy. But at the same time, the idea of social distancing and not shaking hands, I actually think that's a good thing socially. We ought to be careful about contacting with other people. That can affect things like, theater, ball games, traveling in the trains and subways, and that's a problem. Maybe there needs to be a very clear protocol about how to go about those things in
yeah.
a way that maintains relative safety. We can't have 100%. But I
Yeah.
think a lot of it comes down to whether or not the government is going to be able to create enough tests and enough, coverings like masks and whatnot, so that we can start to function and we can know who needs to be, sequestered, and that people who are vulnerable, like the elderly, they ought to probably have a little bit more sequestration than everyone else.
Yeah, I agree with that. And the private sector is ramping up at breakneck speed here, producing
Mm-hmm.
all that protective gear that's needed, producing more ventilators. I think we're going to end up, we're talking the last few weeks about ventilator shortages, and New York's going to need 30,000 of these things, and we're never going to have enough. Meanwhile, we started producing these. The numbers are not as bad as we thought. And
Right.
it looks like in the next couple of weeks, we're going to have a surplus of some of this stuff, and we can certainly send it to some other countries. But you bring up some good points. Before Americans are going to want to start congregating again, they're going to want some assurances. Fortunately, I think we're not that far away from getting a vaccine approved. Now it's got to get through the approval stages, but there's some indications that we could have a vaccine in about 6 months or so. Normally the time is 12 to 18 months. They're trying to speed
Mm.
that up. And there are some therapies that now are working. We don't have enough scientific data yet, but anecdotally, some of these things we're using have seem to have some very positive effects. If we can get these things to the market so Americans feel, well, even if I get this, there's something I can take and it'll go away in a
Right.
couple of days, that will be a big help to get things back to normal.
No, absolutely. In fact, I'm watching New York State. All the hospitals are using hydroxychloroquine and Zithromax. And I don't know why, but for some reason the mainstream media has an aversion to this, probably because Trump likes it.
Like I said,
And also I don't know what their agenda is, but the point is that we're going to wait and see, because I think that the results are going to become apparent probably early to mid next week, since they've been doing it now for almost a week. So, we hope that works. I've been told that it's effective in most cases. So if that be the case, then yeah, there you have something at least that people can take. I'm not sure they could take it as a preventative, or sure should. And obviously it's a prescription like anyone else's side effects. You want to have a doctor order it for you, but at least it does seem to be some good news in that front.
Yeah, what we need to do is restore consumer confidence and Americans'
Mhm.
confidence that they don't have to be afraid of this, that they can live a normal life, that even if they do come in contact with somebody that has it, we do have medications to minimize the effect of that. The other thing is, we don't know for sure, but most flu viruses like this tend not to do very well in warm weather.
That's right.
So as the weather gets warmer, and particularly when it gets hot and humid, it's not likely to do well. Now, we don't know for sure because, look, Florida has a fair number of cases now, and they have been fairly warm. Some people say it's not because of Floridians, it's because the New Yorkers fled New York
That's
and they're
right.
coming
Yeah.
out here. I live at the Jersey Shore, and we have a similar kind of problem. A lot of second homes here. We're trying to keep. It's hard to keep someone away from a house they own, but
No, I know. Like I'm in Massachusetts, it's the same phenomena, where
yeah,
people are staying away. I mean, I'm actually staying, my wife and I are staying at my mother's summer house in the Cape. And
yeah,
yeah, we're not, everyone else is like saying, we're going to shut the bridges so that people like you don't come down here. But so, yeah, I mean, there is, in a way, all of a sudden, borders have become very important, even local borders. And then people are watching.
yes, certainly has. But if it's true that the warm weather minimizes or even kills off some of this, then come the summer, we may see a lot of days where, and I can't wait to hear this, where the government says there were no new cases of coronavirus reported yesterday.
Hallelujah.
Yeah.
Now, the Federal Reserve has lowered interest rates to almost zero, if not zero. And they basically have brought in resellers like BlackRock and others to give security backing to the issuance of $2 trillion worth of loans,
Yeah.
bonded debt to the federal government. Isn't that inflationary in the both short and long term? And what does that say about, I mean, the government creating $2 trillion and possibly more in the form of debt?
Yeah, so a couple things. I said in the beginning, they passed the stimulus package that was both good and bad. So it was good for just the reasons I said. However, we had a $1 trillion budget deficit before this happened. We just added 2.2, if you count the other 100 million, 2.3 trillion to it. That takes you up over $3 trillion. And tax revenue is going to go down because nobody's working for at least 6 weeks here. So I
Right.
think the federal government's looking at a $4 trillion deficit this year, which can't be sustained. We've got to get back to close to balancing the budget. We have a public debt now that's over $23 trillion. The interest expense alone, even at low rates, is over $400 billion a year. So we're going to have to address that. With the Federal Reserve, the idea is to drop interest rates down as close to zero as you can, expand the money supply so there's plenty of money available for small business to borrow. So let's get the economy moving. However, you make a very good point. Increasing the money supply by that much so quickly is inflationary. So the Federal Reserve is walking a fine line too here. They're trying to stimulate the economy as soon as they see it stimulated. And I think by the end of the year, we should see some pretty good growth numbers, is my view. Again, I'm optimistic. I think the Federal Reserve is going to have to reverse their policy and start to
Right.
shrink up that money supply, or we're going to have a severe inflation problem.
By raising interest rates, but that, of course, can have its own deleterious effects.
Right.
I mean, I don't know. This might sound like a slightly radical idea, but I would think that the government could do what Abraham Lincoln did during the Civil War and issue greenbacks, interest-free notes directly from the U.S. Treasury for the emergency, in order to help the economy function, and not pay interest on it, and then after the emergency and the status quo ante, they can start buying them back.
Yeah, they could do something like that. The interest rates are so low now; they're pretty close
It
to
almost is a
zero
greenback,
as it is. But
right?
it's a good concept. They may look at something like that if things don't pick up as quickly as we'd like to see them. Again, I'm optimistic that this, in the short run, we're going to get over this and we'll
Good.
come back stronger than we were before. But again, remains to be seen.
Absolutely. And also, I mean, we're worried about certain small businesses, the mom and pops, restaurants, cafes, hairdressers, the local kind of very, not the big chains, but the local hardware stores. Can they survive it? I mean, I don't know if they can, if this goes on maybe another couple of months. Maybe they could survive it if we could start to have a gradual reopening in May.
Yeah, and again, the idea with the small business loans, was any business, virtually every businesses could apply for one of those loans. And the idea was that, look, we'll keep you afloat for 2 months. And if we can do that, we should be able to have the economy back to a point where we don't have to. And as long as you don't lay off any of your workers, keep everybody working, you don't have to pay the money back. So I think from a looking at a recession standpoint, that's an excellent thing to do. I'm still worried about the size of the deficit. That Small Business Administration program was so successful, and I just started it a week ago. It was been so successful that they're running out of money and they're trying to get some more, and that's what they're debating with Congress now. So that's a good thing. And again, on the bad side, we're going to have to address this deficit issue at some point. It's probably
right.
Not the time.
You can't kick the can down the road too far, and obviously the pain will be a lot less if the more business increases and the more economic activity there occurs. And that has a lot to do, as you said quite nicely, with a sense of confidence and national, acceptance that we could get back to work, and also confidence in the value of the American dollar, and and a general faith in the system, which is going to play a big role in this, just like it plays a big role in the stock market. It's psychological as much as it is real.
Yeah, and remember again, before this started, consumer confidence was at record highs and had been for a year or so. So consumers felt very good about the economy. The unemployment rate was rock bottom. For the last year and a half prior to the coronavirus, there were more job openings than there were unemployed people. So if you had a skill, you can pretty much get a good paying job in the economy up until this coronavirus hit. So consumers were very confident. We need to get back to that point. The underlyings of the economy are still strong, or at least they were up until this virus hit. So we need to get back to that. There'll be a couple of changes, and we'll have to see how many changes there are. But one thing is, once we normalized relations with China, their labor costs were so much lower than ours, 95% lower, that companies said, hey, let's go over there and start manufacturing things, bring them back over here. We can sell them at a lower price. We'll be able to sell more. Americans will like that. Well, then we started to do antibiotics and other medications for the same reason. And now we're seeing, well, maybe that's not such a good idea. We'd like to bring some of that manufacturing back. Now, I think that's going to happen. However, we can't compete with China using a lot of labor. Their labor is just so much cheaper than us. So what's going to happen, I think, is the manufacturing will come back, and it'll be not labor intensive, but capital intensive, which means we'll have robots and artificial intelligence and automation. So the products will be made with very little labor, and that eliminates any of the advantage that China had. Fortunately, when Congress cut taxes in 2018, they cut taxes not just for the middle class to stimulate the economy, which it did, but they also cut taxes for the upper class and corporations. That's where all the new capital is created. So because they did that, I think we'll have enough capital available to businesses. They'll be able to bring back this manufacturing in a capital-intensive environment. That'll enable them to keep the costs down, and we won't have to rely on China for medications and surgical masks and protective equipment. That'll be good into the future.
Well, I mean, that seems to be the general direction the Trump administration was moving from the day he was elected, and that's reducing onerous regulation, lowering or maintaining tax levels, and creating a sustainable tariff on imports so that American industry and labor can be more protected. So, I think if they keep the course, as you say, and maybe with a couple of little extra restrictions on China, then we should see stimulation. Anyway, Michael Busler, I want to thank you very much for joining me this afternoon. Michael Busler is a public policy analyst. Michael, where can people get more information about you and your work?
So my Twitter, I tweet out every one of my columns. That's at MBUSLER, at MBUSLER. If you have a Facebook page, search for Funding Democracy, Democracy, and you'll see all my columns. I'd love to have you follow me.
Excellent. Michael, thanks for joining me this afternoon.
Thank you, Charles. My pleasure. Look forward to doing it again.
Thank you.